You are listening to Radio SGN.
Hey, welcome to The Bolt, your local Seattle Storm podcast. Queer-owned, queer-hosted. My name's CJ. Welcome along for our second episode. First time on camera. Usually we have Madeline Brown with us. She will be back next week, but for now, it is me, you, and the expansion draft. It is April 7th, I believe, as we are recording this, and it is, from what I'm aware, deals are going across. Front offices are sending opportunities to free agents, but all of it is a bit hush-hush right now. So, are we set for big news very soon? Yes, I believe so. Has it happened yet? That'll be for next week. This is a Storm podcast, so we're not going to get too off track. But I do want to talk about the big blockbuster event of the week so far, and that's been Angel Reese being traded by the Chicago Sky to the Atlanta Dream in exchange for 2 first-round draft picks, one in 2027 and one in 2028. And we're not a Chicago, we're not an Atlanta podcast, so I'll keep this simple. But it's fascinating, right? It's bewildering. It doesn't, we all knew that Angel Reese wasn't happy where she was. That's not news to anyone. You know, she spoke up last season. She got a half-game suspension. It was a fraught relationship. But that's not the surprising part about this. The surprising part is what the hell Chicago's strategy is. If they've traded away, for Angel Reese for a rebuild, it got these 2 draft picks. Why last week did they give the Portland Fire their 17th draft pick in exchange for Portland's 21st, and then straight up sent away their 26th draft pick to Toronto for this year's draft for simply the right not to be chosen from their expansion draft's unprotected list? That tells me that even if you don't believe in Angel Reese, you believe in someone on the roster. You see someone. This isn't a complete rebuild. This is not started from scratch. This is rarely ever is it started from scratch, but it is mixed signals where you're saying we don't believe in the leader of this organization, the franchise player, but we believe in the players around them. Because we're not going to let them, we're willing to sacrifice our own picks to keep them here in Chicago. So you just hope for the Sky's sake that the locker room after this is still high on morale. Because if players are unhappy, if the people you wanted to protect are unhappy with what just happened with Angel Reese, then you are fucked. It is going to be a rough few seasons. You are going to be waiting it out till 2028 because you are going to have an unhappy locker room for a while. So we'll have to see. We're not in Chicago. We're in Seattle. And I want to talk about this. Before we get to the big meat and potatoes, I do want to talk about what has actually happened. I do want to talk about what is rumored. And we have some intel here. Always a grain of salt, but some intel from Roberta, a Brazilian-American reporter based here in Seattle. I know they've worked with Fox 13 here in Washington. They've written for Forbes. I haven't seen them previously provide rumors and intel, so I don't know how legitimate they are, but it's caught in some mainstream attention. So we're going to read it anyways. And here's what it says. From Roberta, here's some of the intel I have. Seattle Storm roster movements. Skyler Diggins and Nneka Muhl are highly likely to depart now that Noah Quinn is gone. Also, we might see Diggins in an East Conference team for the first time in 2026. An Eastern Conference team. So, I think there's a few wrinkles here. First, I'm surprised that because Noel Quinn is gone, that means Nneka and Skyler are likely to leave too. You'd think that in terms of organizational stability and kind of that idea of removing the toxins from the room of removing the scandal, you would hope that Quinn being replaced by Sonia Ramon would, be a stability choice that someone like Skyler and Nneka would see and be like, okay, let's go forward with this. Doesn't look that way. If they are likely to depart together, I think that's a bummer. I think our team would really miss Nneka. They were the driving force of our offense. They were our production. They were 18 points a game, I believe, last time I checked. Skyler, I was feeling more iffy about Skyler last week when I was talking with Madeline. But overall, both of them are crucial. They are right now our leading force on our team, on the Storm. And without them, it is going to kind of accelerate that idea of a new generation of Dom, of eventually Olivia Miles. Though that idea that they would eventually replace Skyler and Nneka and be that next wave, you'd hope would be something around 2027, 2028. Seems to be happening much quicker, if this happens at all. But the most interesting thing here is where Diggins would go if Diggins is going to an Eastern Conference team. I don't think it's Indiana because they have Clark. I don't think it's going to be Liberty because they have Sabrina, plus they've kind of got enough veterans as is. So that kind of leaves in my head, I don't think you want to go to Chicago either. I guess they just opened up cap space by letting Angel Reese go, but I don't see that as likely either. I think it's either going to be the Mystics or the Sun, because what those teams need is kind of what the Storm would hope Diggins could provide here, which is a veteran voice in the room as someone who could teach up new players who are coming in via the draft. If Diggins isn't going to be here to teach Olivia Miles a trade, maybe she's going to the Mystics and is going to teach Sonia Citron the trade, how to play at that next level at the WNBA. So my guess would be either the Washington or the Sun if she wants to deal with, the soon-to-be Houston Comets. If one of those two teams, if these rumors really are true, and if we are going to see her in the Eastern Conference, but regardless of her future, regardless of Nneka's future, this would, it's once again restarting from the ground up. We've gone from Sue to Jewel to Nneka and Skyler, and who is going to be that franchise player? Is it going to be Ezzy, Gabby? Is it going to be a new free agent brought in with the space left behind with Skyler and Nneka in terms of finances? Is it going to be that new generation? Once again, we'd be entering kind of a mystery box of what is the next step for this team. And that's always been the case. What is the post-Sue Bird era of this team look like? And every year it feels like we have a new answer for that. So something that really sticks, that feels concrete. We've yet to get to that point. But we are working towards it, even as we are losing players in the draft. And that is what we're going to talk about today. What we do know, what is confirmed, and that is the expansion draft. The Portland Fire, Toronto Tempo, they have their rosters now. With the first pick in the draft, the Portland Fire selected Bridget Carleton, who is the backup at the Minnesota Lynx. I think this makes a lot of sense. You want a versatile player and a ball handler who is from a successful team with a lot of pedigree, someone who has played under the Fils de Collier, has probably learned a lot from that environment. You're investing in someone you believe can make that breakout, who can take that next step if given the minutes, and I think Bridget Carleton is a fantastic choice. And there's also the irony of that she's from Canada, and I think a lot of people on social media saw the irony in that of the U.S. taking a Canadian player before Toronto could get theirs. And they chose Julie Alleman. Nice choice. Who knows if they were even considering Bridget as their first option, but some fun irony there. Toronto didn't choose anyone from the Storm, but with their last pick in the draft, the last pick of the expansion draft period, the Portland Fire selected Nika Muhl from the Seattle Storm. And I think it kind of leads into the conversations that are going to be throughout this free agency session and throughout this entire season, which is how does the new CBA change this landscape, WNBA landscape, for the better and for the worse. And you would hope, had this happened next season, had this happened a year later, Nika tearing her left ACL or her right, she's torn both her ACLs at this point, that she wouldn't have been put in that position to begin with, because players now have the minimum wage, I believe, now in the WNBA is $270,000. And with that, you don't need a side gig. You don't need, I think for a lot of players, the great thing about this is it no longer makes international play the standard. You don't have to have a living in women's basketball. You no longer have to go play overseas during the off season. You can rely on Unrivaled and WNBA and stay in the States. You can just play with one of these leagues and still make the money you need to fulfill whatever life goals or lifestyle you may have in mind for yourself. And you would hope that for players like Nika Muhl, they wouldn't have to play internationally in order to succeed. They wouldn't have to play year round. They could have a full off season of recovery. But on the other hand, these are still international players, and these are, just because there's no longer a need to play internationally doesn't mean that we're not going to see a want to play internationally. Ultimately, Eurobasket's not going anywhere. These institutions that have had players in it for 20, 30 years aren't going anywhere, just because there's less of an incentive to play with them. They may even raise the incentive. Who knows? Maybe a group like Eurobasket sees, okay, they've raised the salary in the WNBA, we need to raise ours, and you can't blame anyone if they want that extra check, And for a lot of these players, we're seeing more international players in the league. If I checked here, 13 international players were taken in this expansion draft alone. I'd imagine dozens more exist just across the league. And I think that was set with the Valkyries, where they brought in a lot of international faces, a lot of unknowns, a lot of, Czech and Russian names. It's like, who is that? Who are they from? Where are they from? How do I pronounce that? And yet they succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. So I think there's a lot of hope to copy that in terms of looking internationally and scouting internationally for talent, especially as the pool and the need for more women's basketball players grows. And as you have that, you have more international players, and maybe it becomes less a financial incentive and more of a civic incentive, more of a national pride incentive of in the same way, Team USA. LeBron James does not need the money to play on Team USA. He does it because it's Team USA and it's the Olympics. And, it's a platform to show yourself off. And it's a platform to increase your fan base and your familiarity across the world. It's not just about money. So I can imagine for a lot of these smaller players, if they're given an opportunity and a paycheck by Eurobasket, to play on these big stages internationally and to play for their home countries, it might not make the most it might not make the most sense if you're just thinking financially and logically, but as someone who's from those places, who understands the value of European basketball on a level that, frankly, I, as an American, can't get to, just putting myself in their shoes, why wouldn't you take that opportunity? Why wouldn't you want to represent, if you're Nika Muhl, why wouldn't you want to represent Croatia in Eurobasket? I'm actually not sure where Nika is from, but let's say for right now she's from Croatia and represents her home country on a major stage. Why wouldn't you want that? You don't need that. You don't need to work that job, but you might want to. And that's kind of the thing. As we have more international players, that's more players who might want to play internationally. And does that change? Does it does that ultimately mean we're still going to have off-season injuries of players playing overseas who experienced an ACL tear? Maybe this doesn't solve the problem entirely. It just takes a new form. And always, life's complicated. That's the reality of things. So often problems just aren't solved in their entirety. They just take new forms. But I think overall, CBA is a good thing. I think we're just going to see a different landscape. And what that means for younger players like Nika, what that means for international players like Nika is the mystery here. But, I hope she recovers. I hope she doesn't have to go through another injury-laden season after this one. And I hope she finds a new future with Portland. Simple as that. At the end of the day, all these players are humans. You never want an injury on the field, and you can only hope the best for them. So that is going to do it for our second episode of The Bolt. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, as mentioned, Madeline Brown of WNBA Data on TikTok is going to be back next week to talk everything WNBA Draft, to talk all the major free agency happenings that occurred last week. And we will see you then, here, next Wednesday. Take care.